All right, let's get to the Elon part, because this is important too, and it gets to some of the stuff we're talking about here. Let's put this poll up there on the screen. This was from The Economist and YouGov, and they did a poll of Republicans where they asked them in November of 2024 how much they wanted Elon to have influence in the Trump administration. So at that time, post-election, they said they wanted Elon to, quote, have a lot of influence over the incoming Trump administration. 47%, 29% said a little, 12% said none at all. Now, let's go to where we are today. In February, you have 26% a lot, 43% a little, 17% none at all. So a big shift from a lot to a little. This is difficult to parse. You know, it's kind of complicated in terms of all of that, but it's just big questions too in terms of like what is fueling that and what even that really means. But there's some signs for some problems there for Elon and for Doge. Let's go to the next one.
Let me just, before we jump to the next one, let me just also point out the numbers from there with regard to Democrats and independents. I mean, you can imagine Democrats were never super psyched about Elon having a lot of influence in the Trump administration. But in November, you had 15% of Democrats and 26% of independents saying they wanted him to have a lot of influence. Overall, 13% of surveyed Americans want Musk to have a lot of influence on the Trump administration now. So at this point in time, whereas previously it was 15% of Democrats, 26% of independents saying they wanted him to have a lot, now it's only 6% of independents who say they want him to have a lot of influence. And if you take, you know, the entire American public together, only 13% say they want him to have a lot of influence. And, you know, I think there's just a natural reaction against like the richest man on the planet making all of these decisions about whether you get Social Security, whether your public school system gets funded, whether your Head Start has funding, whether your rural health clinic has funding, et cetera. There's a revulsion to that. And I think, you know, as he has aggressively asserted himself in ways that frankly went far beyond, I always thought Doge would have teeth. I never thought it was some blue ribbon commission make work project. This has gone way beyond what I expected and is a piece of this that, you know, of the Trump administration that I really didn't factor in, you know, going in thinking about how this was all going to unfold. And so I do think there is a reaction against that usurping of power from, you know, the dude that just got elected and the Congress, et cetera, and all consolidating power in the hands of this one oligarch.
I think it's possible, but I'm still very skeptical of this theory. So I'll just say this, politically, I have really had to force myself. Is the media being institutionally left-wing and the narratives of a lot of this stuff that have been able to shape? Think about the biggest psyops of the election, like Brett Summer, fake, right? Tim Walz, incredible candidate, fake. Such incredible with men, all that, fake. Beyonce, all this other stuff, non-existent. When we think back through the election, even with the polls and other, childless cat lady is going to sink them with women, fake. Springfield, Ohio, oh, that's going to nuke them. Nope, actually Springfield voted more for Trump. Puerto Rico, garbage gate, all of that. Complete psyop on all of these. I'm not sure I yet grasp the lack of power the media has in shaping its narratives. So for example, in this question, the United States is in a constitutional crisis. They say agree 54%, disagree 27%. So people are like, see, people are turning against Elon. It's like, well, if you ask the average Joe on the street, is the United States in a constitutional crisis? And he says yes. Is he talking about Elon? Or is he talking about Mitch McConnell being like 99 years old and collapsing and having a stroke? Is he talking about, is he probably just evergreen agree because he doesn't like the way that the government is going?
Yeah.
I'm still just deeply skeptical that Americans are as tuned in. I think what I really learned from the election was that the power of these media narratives around childless cat ladies, around Haitians, all of this, it ended up being literally the opposite. I mean, so much of the institutional credibility from the Seltzer poll, all of these shibboleths that we all had in American politics were broken fundamentally. And I'm not talking about this from like, oh my God, this is amazing. But you're like, you really do have to look at it and be like, wow. I mean, really, when you think about all the things that people said that were going to sink Donald Trump, and they ended up having, if anything, a negligible or the opposite effect in the electorate, I'm just deeply skeptical about this Elon thing hitting home unless something like what you're saying materializes. So far, Social Security has not been touched, right? Getting access to Social Security, okay. Even Medicare, it's like, well, if you get Medicare fraud, it's great. Actually, there's some estimate of $50 billion in Medicare fraud. Will they properly do it? I don't know.
That's not what they're doing, but yeah.
I don't know. Listen, I have no idea. the question
They're
is,
gonna come after Rick Scott.
yes, well, actually, we should go after Rick Scott.
Absolutely.
I totally agree
but
with
they're
that.
not going to do that.
The question is how it materializes functionally, and also how people experience these events really in their lives. And I really took away from the election that, because if you turn on CNN and all of that, there's all this Musk talk and all of this. And I don't think it's bad, because here we're trying to predict the impact of stuff. But really, when you think back to that effect, it just didn't exist. So I'm skeptical of some of this stuff. I deeply am, in terms of just even the polling. And I've had to learn that on immigration, mass deportation. I'm not going to be like, see, America's totally with this. I know how Americans are, right? Like the moment you see a little kid in a cage, it's like things can change a lot, and they can change on a dime. So the vibe, the way that you experience, and the way that you actually execute a lot of this stuff, I think that stuff matters the most. And so I'm not ready to make a call. Like Elon is dramatically unpopular. Elon is all this. All I can say is he's a risk. I know he has his own agenda. Analytically, I can see the ways that this could go wrong. But I could also see how it could be a pretty popular success.
I don't think so. But I mean, to be honest with you, this to me is the least important point. What we were discussing before, the reality of what he's doing and what it means for the country, to me is the most important point. But, the trend, the decline for Elon, he used to be very popular. People, he's a genius, he's an inventor, blah, blah, blah. He made my electric car, I think it's awesome. I mean, a lot of liberals love this guy, right?
True.
I'm seeing a lot of bumper stickers on Teslas that are like, I bought this before we knew Elon was insane, and things like that. But, he had high approval ratings kind of across the board. And ever since he really, became a partisan figure, obviously his approval rating took a hit, because that's just going to instantly,
well, that's inevitable.
Instantly, lead you into this very tribal, partisan mindset. And then since he's been so aggressively at the forefront of the Trump administration, it seems pretty clear his approval rating has continued to decline. I don't disagree on the constitutional crisis piece, even though I do think it's pretty, we're pretty clearly into a constitutional crisis, or at the very least, if they go forward with their threats to ignore court decisions, we will certainly be in a constitutional crisis. I think you would even agree with it at that point if that ultimately happens. But I do think that there's probably a lot of people who, just like, they're not happy with the government. And then it's just like, yes, it's a constitutional crisis. It's sort of like, on election night, there was like, what was your top issue? And one of them was preserving democracy or whatever.
That's right.
And there were a lot of Republicans who were like, we have to elect Donald Trump to
because
preserve
the election was stolen.
Democracy, because the election was stolen. And even, with the constitutional crisis thing, even if I'm to read into it that people really are paying attention, et cetera, I mean, now you had Elon, we showed the tweet earlier, where he's calling a federal court making a ruling a judicial coup. So they're also setting up language about how it's a constitutional crisis because the courts are overreaching and they're checking the legitimate power of the executive, et cetera, et cetera. The reason, though, why I depart from you in terms of, like, I don't know that it matters that much whether it's popular or not, although we have seen some pushback work in some limited ways. But the way he's trying to consolidate power is to make, like, your democratic voice completely irrelevant. That is part of the project of installing a monarch and a CEO dictator. But the reason why I think it's going to be dramatically unpopular is because even if you take the Silicon Valley framing to, like, move fast and break things, that means you're breaking things. And the federal government does matter for people, for planes not falling out of the sky and your local health clinic getting funded. Right now in Virginia, half of the rural health clinics that are particularly dependent on actually in rural, like, red parts of the state, like southwestern Virginia, half of them are still lacking funding. Quite a number of them have had to shut down. Virginia's not the only state. Rhode Island, other states across the country still are lacking funding. You've had farmers who were depending on deals that they had made with the federal government to finance certain investments in their farms. Those contracts have been at least paused. So they're on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars that they thought the federal government was going to participate in those costs for that upgrade. Those, and that's just like the small ball beginning of the situation. But the way he operates, if you just look at the way he operates at Twitter, if you look at the way he's operated at Tesla, at SpaceX, et cetera, things literally break. Rockets literally explode. Twitter is unable to host a Spaces with Ron DeSantis, and then the one with Trump has all sorts of audio issues and problems and sounds like shit as well. That's one thing when you're running a company. It's another thing when you're running the government. So even by his own description of what he's doing here, it's going to lead to things breaking that are important to people. And I do think there will be a tremendous backlash against that. Now, whether that backlash matters or not, to me, is more of the open question.
I think you might, listen, I think the risk is there. It's still an open, if they're smart, what you do is you just keep it on CFPB, USAID, Medicare fraud. If a single check gets stopped, that's when there's going to be problems. If old people don't get their health care, if old people don't...
That's already happened. I mean, these health clinics
Well, then
are already
actually,
shuttered.
let's get to a bigger political point. I mean, maybe we'll talk about this with CFPB, but let's be honest here, right? A lot of the people who are being affected voted red. Are they really going to blame Trump and Elon, or are they going to blame Democrats? Like, are they actually going to make the dots? I'm skeptical, personally, in terms of the way that politics has changed. And just think about the media environment that people swim in. You know, this is, do we have Thomas Frank's book here? I think we used to. I mean, what's the matter with Kansas? I understand how leftists see it. It's also a diagnosis for literally how the playbook of all of this has happened.
Yeah.
I encourage people to go out and read it.
This is kind of my monologue about the way that even like the, changes of the CFPB are being ushered in under like a culture war agenda. And, it's similar to what liberals did with, like, instead of lifting wages, we're gonna just, have a diversity statement or have,
Land acknowledgement.
Yeah, land acknowledgements and these sorts of things, or we're gonna pass a resolution affirming the Equal Rights Amendment,
at the very last day.
Women's rights or whatever.
What the hell was that? I wish we'd cover that more.
But
too busy.
yeah, I mean, I'll save this for my monologue, but that's effectively the playbook here as well. So
hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.